It is our great pleasure to introduce Congressman Sherman from the beautiful city of Sherman Oaks, the city with a wonderful name. And without further ado, we will hand it over to you since you are in a rush, sir. We would like to show a short video if you have the time. If not, we can go ahead and get started.
Hello, I'm Congressman Brad Sherman from, as you point out, California's best named city, Sherman Oaks. For over 23 years, I've served on the Foreign Affairs Committee of the U.S. House of Representatives, where I've made it a priority to fight for human rights in Iran, introducing the first sanctions bill in 1998. And that was the first time I did it. Obviously, others had been involved in prior decades. And I've been advocating for a non-nuclear, democratic, secular, free, and prosperous Iran. It's an honor to join you once again, as I've joined you and similar groups again and again, as we fight for democracy and human rights in Iran. While the regime has continued to fuel extremism across the region, every day Iranians have stood up to the regime, especially the recent proposed fuel price hikes and fuel rationing, and have said enough. And they've done that at great risk to themselves and their families. Iranians have come out to the streets to protest the regime, and in return, the regime has cut off the internet and blamed foreign governments for attempting to sabotage the regime. Now, I'm not a real fan of the regime, but the people in the streets, they're reacting to what they see. They're reacting to what this regime has put them through for decades. They're not reacting to what some guy from California is saying. And they are there screaming, enough is enough. But America should and does stand in solidarity with brave Iranians fighting for this new chapter in Iran's great and multi-millennial history. None of us know what will happen to these protests, but each person who marched on the streets should know that the American people are with them. We stand with the Iranian people. We stand with them as they face down a regime that cares nothing for its own people's freedom or prosperity. In May of last year, I joined with my colleagues, and I was the lead Democrat in introducing HRES 374, a resolution that supports the rights of the Iranian people to free expression and condemns the Iranian regime for its crackdown on legitimate protests. Now more than ever, after thousands of people have been killed since the start of these protests in 2019, and just in November of 2019, scarcely 6 months ago, we stand with the people of Iran who are continuing to hold legitimate protests against an oppressive and corrupt regime. We now have 219 bipartisan co-sponsors of our resolution. That is a majority of the House of Representatives. Iran's violent crackdown on the protests speaks volumes about the regime in Tehran. It employs violence and espionage against its own people, both at home and abroad. A prosperous Iran would be a peaceful Iran, where the Iranian people's freedoms and human rights are restored. We must work towards a secular, non-nuclear, democratic, and prosperous Iran. These goals will come together because the Iranian people have shown ingenuity and hard work and capacity, decade after decade, century after century. So if we can end the corruption that this regime has created, if we can end the oppression which stifles economic progress, and if Iran can be restored to free commerce among all nations, prosperity will return to Iran, and Iran will be more prosperous than it has been in modern times. Most notably, Iran must be prevented from buying and selling weapons. In May, I joined 387 of my colleagues in sending a letter to the Trump administration, urging them to spare no effort in seeking to extend the United Nations arms embargo on Iran, which is set to expire in October of this year. The letter encourages robust diplomacy to prevent the expiration of the embargo. And clearly, the Iranian people need food. The Iranian people need medicine. They do not need their government spending the money on arms, which they would use to oppress those very Iranian people. So we must continue the UN arms embargo and continue the UN travel restrictions on those regime figures that have engaged in proliferation activities. The UN arms embargo will be the first provision of the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, to expire. Our letters, again, signed by the overwhelming majority of the House, represents an imperative to reauthorize this provision so that Iran does not become a greater menace to the region and the government does not divert funds urgently needed by the people to arms acquisitions and international adventures. Iran must be sanctioned, that is to say, the Iranian government must be sanctioned for its egregious violation of human rights, including infringing on free speech. Last May, I sent a letter to the president demanding he enforce the sanctions against individual companies that export censorship and privacy violating technologies to Iran. Those sanctions are a part of a law that I helped pass back in the wake of the 2009 protests. Unfortunately, that provision has not been enforced. The provision I speak of is Section 106 of the Comprehensive Iran Sanctions Accountability and Divestment Act, which provides for sanctions against companies that export censorship technologies to Iran. I've also led congressional efforts to protect the Iranian opposition members who are outside Iran. In 2018, I led a letter to the Albanian Prime Minister urging that Iranian dissidents living in Albania be protected. Earlier this summer, there were reports that 2 Iranians were arrested by Albanian authorities. The Prime Minister must ensure that Iran is not trying to silence its critics living in Albania through trumped up evidence and trumped up charges. The Iranian regime cannot black out the internet hoping to quell the legitimate protests of the people of Iran and cover up its horrific actions against its own citizens. We must continue to advocate for an Iran that is non-nuclear, democratic, secular, free, and if those conditions are achieved, prosperous and part of the community of nations. I'm Congressman Brad Sherman. I thank you for putting in the time and the effort, along with so many of us, in working for a peaceful, prosperous, and non-nuclear Iran. Thank you for letting me participate, even though I have to do so with more primitive technology, and thank you for your efforts.
Congressman Sherman, I cannot tell you how much we appreciate you joining us today. And again, we apologize for the confusion and the delay. And we just want to thank you on behalf of all the members in California who appreciate everything you have done for our committee and echoing the voice of the Iranian people who are struggling for a free Iran. We thank you and have a wonderful day.
As the second ranking member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, I think it's my duty to speak out for a democratic Iran that respects human rights. And I look forward to working with you in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Congressman Sherman. I would echo what Shekufo just said. Obviously, you have been a very outspoken voice for the non-nuclear secular Republic of Iran. In fact, I remember your speech at the March 8th of 2019 rally, where you spoke of Mrs. Mariam Rajavi's 10-point plan and how she envisions a free Iran. So your voice is heard by the people of Iran today. You have echoed a sentiment of US Congress with the resolution that you have led with Congressman McClintock. Thank you for all your hard work and all your support, sir. Thank you.